Tonight, the MP Mike Freer stands down because of death threats. He tells me about his life on the job in a stab vest and how anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been. The Prime Minister warns of an attack on democracy and the Speaker calls for a nicer politics. But after the murder of 2 MPs in recent years, we ask how and if things can be improved. We'll also get the thoughts of Dame Margaret Hodge about getting a death threat today and her plan to clean up politics. Also tonight, interest rates are held steady at 5.25%, but the Bank of England offers some welcome inflation news for the Chancellor. We speak to the woman who could be the next Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, about the unanswered questions on Labour's £28 billion investment pledge. And after reports of the potential flaws of using artificial intelligence for recruitment, we find out whether AI can provide a CV for a PM. All that and more with Alicia Kearns and Phil Collins, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Who would want to be an MP? Abuse, mockery, death threats? It's worth just pausing for a minute to take that in, because I actually think we can be a bit blasé about that. Oh yeah, death threats, MPs get those all the time. Hang on, are we seriously saying that people tell MPs that they're going to kill them all the time? I mean, what is actually wrong with people? And it's just not good enough to say, oh, it's just social media. No one should take that seriously. Sir David Amess MP, murdered in 2021. Joe Cox MP, murdered in 2016. So it's perhaps not surprising that Mike Freer, the Conservative MP for Finchley and Golders Green, has made the decision to stand down at the next election because of the death threats, because of an arson attack on his office, because he was targeted by the man who went on to kill Sir David Amess. We'll hear my interview with him in a moment, where he told me that MPs are at risk when they're walking the streets, when they go to the shop. You're just never quite sure what's around the corner, he said. And he also talked about the impacts on family and loved ones when they see you going out to do some part of your job wearing a stab vest. So again, who would want to be an MP? And that's a problem for all of us. If we're ever tempted to moan about the quality of MPs, well, maybe we get the MPs that we deserve. Well, let's listen now to what Mike Freer told me a little while earlier. Thank you so much for being on the programme and for talking to Sky News. You're going to stand down at the next election. Can you explain why?
I think the key issue is that there comes a point which the level of risk becomes too much. I think every MP has to cope with a level of abuse, a lot of it low level, whether it's graffiti, just rude emails, or generally someone shouting at you. That's kind of almost par for the course these days. But once you've had 2 or 3 threats to your life, and then, that was bad enough, and that certainly gave me pause to think after I had a narrow miss with the man that went on to kill David Amess. And then the arson attack was just kind of the last straw. In some ways, as members of Parliament, we sign up to a level of it, but it's also the impact on our families and also our staff. And I think there comes a point you say, enough, it's time to go off and do something else.
Yeah, the impact on your family and your loved ones must be enormous. I mean, they didn't choose to become an MP themselves. Is that something that's been a big factor in your decision?
Yes, I mean, obviously, no MP can really do their job unless their spouse, partner, family are supportive. And when they start to worry constantly about whether you're going to make it home at night, or want to make sure that you get picked up from the tube station rather than walking home alone, then you start to see the impact on them. And that's really not fair. And also, when they see you going out to do some part of your job in a stab vest, equally, that kind of has an impact on their mental health. And so it's really not fair for them. They didn't sign up to it. And it's a real shame, because so much of the job is amazing. So much of their job is to actually get things done, whether it's here in Westminster or in a constituency. And we have to balance the good against the bad, but there comes a point where you just have to say enough.
It's really depressing. And also, it's worth pointing out, these are real-world things that are happening. You had an arson attack at your office. You were targeted by the man who stabbed Sir David Amess MP to death. We all remember the murder of Joe Cox, the stabbing of Stephen Timms. Has it felt quite frightening at times?
I mean, the difficulty is you're never quite sure what's around the corner. I mean, I had 2 run-ins with Muslims Against Crusades. I mean, luckily, the ringleaders of that particular group went on to go to prison for different issues. But when they put up on their website, let Stephen Timms be a pointed warning to you that you're not welcome because I was due to have a surgery in the local mosque. That's quite intimidating. Then when they turned up and broke through and then, intimidated me, and I had to be taken into an office for safety until the police arrived. And then they followed up at the next mosque surgery, just doing a demonstration. It does make you think, what's next? And as you say, it was a very narrow miss that the man that went on to kill Sir David came to Finchley first. It was purely fluke that I'd been reshuffled into a different position by Boris, and I ended up being in Westminster, not in Finchley. Otherwise, I suspect I would have been attacked, because he did say he'd come to Finchley armed with the intent to harm. And so that, our offices have often been turned into fortresses now. Our homes are turned into fortresses. But we're at risk when we are walking the street, when we're going to the shop, when we're trying to do so much of our daily constituency work. That's where the risk is the greatest, and you're just never quite sure what's around the corner.
I'm really sorry. It sounds like not a way that anyone should be having to live their life. Has it got worse since the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, in my patch, as you know, it's an amazing patch. It's so diverse. We have so many communities. But I am home to the largest Jewish community of any MP. And whenever things go off in the Middle East, we see a rise in anti-Semitism, but we have never seen it as bad as it is currently. When my constituents tell me that they won't come into central London now because they don't feel safe because of the demonstrations, when colleagues, Jewish colleagues, don't feel that they can wear their kippah on the street anymore, or they're taking off a necklace with a Star of David, then that's not acceptable. I mean, you go down Golders Green Road now, and you just, the whole stretch has either got police, or it's got, the CST, or it's got Shomrim, which are the security teams. No other community has to have security to keep them safe from going shopping. No other community has to have security guards outside their places of worship or outside their schools. And this is something we've got to deal with. We should be able to disagree with each other without having to fear for our lives.
Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, has tweeted to say that you're a first-class politician, firstly. She then went on to say that he's been hounded out of office by Islamists is a serious indictment of where we are as a society. She talks about hateful marches, a lack of robust policing, and that she wants to change the law to clamp down on extremism and anti-Semitism. Do you share her assessment?
I'm not quite sure it's quite as stark. I wouldn't want to necessarily paint one community. There are clearly, there is a pattern of behaviour, whether it's Muslims Against Crusades or Hali Abibi Ali and the radicalisation. I think that's a very fair point, but I wouldn't want to say that is the whole community. That's not my experience of the whole Muslim community. The issue is we can increase security around MPs or any public figure, but that's not addressing the point. One of my biggest concerns is, social media especially has a lot to answer for. It allows and it gives free rein to people to be aggressive, to say almost what they want, with very little consequence. If you complain to social media, nothing seems to happen. And that's the bit that we need to address. Not just keep more and more security, but actually stop people either being radicalised or being given the green light to feel they've got open season on their public servants.
Are you worried about people being put off becoming MPs?
Yes, I mean, women MPs get it far worse. I mean, I've had obviously a round of incidents, some of them very serious, but some of my, female colleagues, the abuse they get, and not just, just the political route. When colleagues get threatened with rape, that is really not on. And, all abuse, is not on. But some of my female colleagues just get the threats they get is simply unacceptable. And again, rather than just keep giving us more panic buttons or more security, we need to get to the root cause, which I think, and part of that has to be social media, and they need to take responsibility for what they allow on their platforms and deal with it much more swiftly. And also, generally speaking, on policing, we need to be much more rigorous and visible in arresting those people that overstep the mark. I mean, that's one of the things. I know the Met do a good job at arresting people after demonstrations, but people don't see that, and we need that visible consequences of overstepping the mark. And sometimes that's the bit that's missing.
Mike Freer there, talking about the death threats, talking about the arson attack, and of course the impact on his family as well. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the former Labour minister and MP for Barking, Dame Margaret Hodge. Now, she's been involved in politics since the 1970s. She's no stranger to abuse, but I also wanted to hear about her positive vision for cleaning up politics. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to speak to you as always.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk to you about the Governance Committee and your recommendations there. But first, just to get your reaction to the news that Mike Freer is not going to be seeking re-election.
It's depressing, it's shocking, but it's unsurprising. If you face the sort of threats that he's faced, you can understand why he puts his family first and thinks again about career in politics. But let me just say this, that actually all of us as elected politicians, we have to be accountable. So I had my first death threat, Sophie, if you believe this, in 1976 when I was in local government. There was a man with an axe who was threatening me. So it's always come a little bit with the territory. And I think back to my time in fighting the BNP up to the election in 2010, which was a pretty vicious campaign, but there was no social media, so it was all sort of it was the phone, it was letters, and it was emails, it was that sort of thing. And it was easier to control. It's social media that has made it so immediate, so horrific.
I have to say, when I listen to you, because look, you're a pretty strong woman, right? You kind of talk about the guy with the axe or, the death threats, but it is quite depressing. You'll talk to any MP and they will speak about getting death threats, getting people harassing them, talking about their family.
Yeah.
And of course, we have seen the reality of what this can mean. Mike Freer targeted by the man who stabbed the MP, Sir David Amess, to death. I mean, we all remember the killing of Joe Cox, the stabbing of Stephen Timms. Is it getting more dangerous, do you think, to become an MP?
Goodness knows, I find that really hard to answer. I mean, I was on the list when Stephen Timms got stabbed. There were three of us in East London that were on the list of that particular... it was a woman in that case who was doing it. So we've all had those... And I did get a lot of death threats, particularly when I was fighting anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. That was probably at its worst. And I got a death threat today as well on social media. So today. So it happens all the time. Is it getting worse? I just think it's social media. I think the thing I would tackle is anonymity. Whether that would have helped Mike Freer, I don't know. But why should people be able to post this horrible, abusive stuff on social media and remain anonymous?
You see someone like, Mike Freer, are you worried it is going to put people off becoming an MP? Who would want to be an MP?
Well, all I can tell you is I'm getting to the stage at the point in my life where I'm giving it up. But I've had the most fantastic career. I've had the most amazing opportunities. I wanted to make the world a better place, and in my tiny little way, I hope I've contributed to doing that. So it is still an amazing opportunity and privileged opportunity, and I hope people see that. But we've got to make it safer and easier.
Is it frightening?
I think I've got really hardened to it. I mean, since the Israel Gaza conflict, there's been another spike. I now have to have plainclothes officers with me when I'm in the constituency, and that's horrible. I absolutely hate it.
You have plainclothes officers with you for security in your constituency.
Yeah.
So when you go down the high street, go to local places.
Well, it's really when it's at the event. I'm determined not to cut myself off from my constituents. So if I'm doing a street meeting or I'm doing a meeting about a particular issue. I mean, last week I was around a closure of a library, so we had a public meeting around that. I do coffee afternoons, all those where, you know, you open yourself to access from your constituents. I'm not going to stop that. And if that means I have to have greater security, that's the price I have to pay. I don't like it. I wish I didn't have to have it. But that's the advice that I've had, and obviously I take the advice I'm given.
I'm sorry, that's appalling, to be honest, and a depressing state of our, our public discourse. I want to talk to you about the Governance Committee. We're talking about standards in public life, about attracting the right people to become MPs. Now, you're part of the Governance Committee, which is effectively, a cross-party group trying to clean up public life, I suppose. What are you trying to do?
So if I take one example, for example, there is the Commissioner who's supposed to advise the Prime Minister on the Ministerial Code, and we've seen under Boris Johnson how the Prime Minister totally ignored the advice he got. What we think is you put that on a statutory basis, you give the commissioners some independence, you give them powers so they can investigate something without being asked to do so by the Prime Minister. And then if the Prime Minister of that time doesn't agree with the findings of the commissioner, the Prime Minister will have to do a public report saying why he or she disagrees. And that just strengthens it, and I think will... and the other thing we've said is ministers should take an oath to stand by what are known as the Nolan principles, which are the ethical principles that we all sign up to as politicians, but they take an oath when they take office. Those are very simple things. They don't cost a lot of money, but they would help us clean up politics, and we do the same about looking at who's admitted into the House of Lords, all those sort of things.
That was one that caught my eye, I have to say. One of the recommendations is effectively telling PMs they can't just dish out honours to who they want. We've seen some pretty controversial honours lists, I think it's fair to say, more recently. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer aren't going to go for that, are they? That's one of the perks of the job, isn't it?
I think they will, because they can still... Let's take the honours first. First of all, the honours is a great system because it's people who've contributed to society. It's a really great thing. You get an honour and you go to the palace and you get that. That's a brilliant thing. We want to conserve that. That is a way of recognising public service in the community. There has been abuse by Prime Minister's list. All we're saying is that if the Prime Minister wishes to propose people, proposal goes through an independent system, uninfluenced by him. And if there are good grounds for giving that person honour, they get it. And I think that's fine. Why should the Prime Minister not have that system of verification? And again, it builds trust back into a system, and that helps build trust back into politics.
OK, thank you very much. Dame Margaret Hodge there. Well, let's bring in a duo for this evening, the Conservative MP and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, and Phil Collins, a columnist, writer and a former speechwriter to Tony Blair as well. Great to have you both on the show. I think one of the things I find so depressing about the death threats that MPs get, the security that people have to have, is it's almost become normalised. We all almost come to just expect this is just part of being an MP, and that just seems to me to be completely unacceptable.
I mean, it is normalised, and I thought it was really interesting when you said to Mike, we talk about death threats as if they're normal. People do seem to now think that that's just a part of the course and something we should accept in our jobs. But I wouldn't accept it in any other workplace. No. And it is normalised, and it is normal that I get told that if I've pre-advertised where I'm going to be in my constituency, I need to bring plainclothes police officers with me. What am I meant to do at the weekend? I'm not going to take them to Aldi with me.
I can't get my head around this, because Margaret Hodge said the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's important because MPs need to be able to interact with the public, right? You have to be able to go and talk to your constituents, to be available, and that then brings risk.
It's a serious threat to politics, obviously. I mean, Mike Freer was right that if we increase the security, that doesn't address the actual core problem. But still, if I was in Alicia's position, I would want to increase the security for the obvious reason. But we do have to think about it. It is obviously will make politics impossible because, you know, again, as Mike said in that interview, if we want to attract the best people to politics and for them to stay in politics, well, this is an intolerable situation.
There's just no answer, though. That's what I really struggle with, as I sit there going, is there something I'm missing? Should I be able to sat here and say, you know what, Sophie, you know what, Phil, this is what we can do to fix the situation? And I don't know what it is. And it's also not just threats from Brits. It's also, you know, threats from abroad, from other countries. But I think the hardest thing is when you find out it's someone in your constituency, because you always wonder, well, if I once said, and I got attacked for it, I used to work in quite a dangerous place in the world, but I felt safe because I had a whole protection routine around me. We couldn't go anywhere without 48 hours notice. Walking around your constituency, when people recognise your face and know who you are, you're more worried about that one nutter who is just following you and looks like a normal person who comes at you from nowhere. And it's the unknown. And I think Mike was saying the exact same thing. It's that unknown where your safe place is. Like, you know, Rutland's my safe place, it's my home. But because everyone knows who you are, and there are people, unfortunately, who think they can have that entitlement to shout at you or attack you, it's... Yeah,
he was saying that, you know, you can make a fortress of your office, you can make a fortress of your home, which actually is quite depressing as well. That's the situation that, you know, you find yourself in. But then, you go out, you go to the shops, you make yourself available to the constituents, and you're putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, I mean, we just can't live like that in the fullness of time, can you? So, you know, the set of things we're discussing, what can you do? Well, yes, social media has amplified this and exacerbated it and accelerated this. It's given a platform and a voice to people who previously didn't have. It has that effect of confirming people in their prejudices and you know, they can pursue them and things get made concrete, don't they? So all of those things are true, and there's absolutely no question that we need to find ways to find these companies who are not publishers in the old style to take some responsibility for it. And it's extremely difficult because, I know the complexity of that question is blithe to just say, well, they should do it. But we've got to find a way because this is one part of it. I don't blame social media for people. The vast majority of people in the world are perfectly capable of being civil, even if they're on Twitter.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
Suella Braverman's tweeted, she said that Islamists have hounded Mike Freer out of his constituency, and she blames extremist marches, the lack of robust policing. What would you say to that, Alicia? Do you agree with her assessment?
I think Mike didn't. He was very diplomatic in his language, so I should probably leave his language to speak for him, but I think we have to be very cautious when we try to draw corollaries, and particularly when we are using someone's retirement to pursue our own interests and things that we want to be seen to be being tough on. That's not something that I would like to see happen.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you, Alicia and Phil. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up. Interest rates were held at 5.25% today, but the Bank of England expects inflation to fall. So could we see a rate cut ahead of the election? We'll have the details.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Sower murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Hello, welcome back. The Bank of England has signalled fresh hope for the UK economy as it forecasts that inflation could be down to 2% within months. The Governor, Andrew Bailey, said that things were moving in the right direction as the bank decided to hold the current interest rate at 5.25%. Here's our economics editor, Ed Conway.
What goes up must come down. Until today, the Bank of England had been telling everyone that the next move in interest rates was likely to be upwards. Now the Governor says that's changed.
So I think, to be clear, I think therefore really the decision, unless the world changes, and of course unfortunately the world does change, and particularly at the moment, the next decision is more likely to be when do we cut.
Right, the next decision is more likely to be when do we cut.
But we haven't reached a view on when that will be.
Why the change in stance? Well, partly because inflation's coming down faster than expected, forecast to touch the bank's 2% target briefly in April. But partly it's because the economy is really struggling.
It's a bit slow after January because we're still trying to get free sale.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get all the new stuff in.
You can see the signs here on the high street.
It was a slower December than we had hoped for. We didn't have that big push before Christmas, the way, kind of that rush of people coming that we would normally expect to see before Christmas, which was a bit disappointing.
Was that a surprise?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it obviously affected our sales quite a bit.
Today, the bank left rates on hold, but the real question is, what's next?
So now we know the next move is likely to be down rather than up, but that raises another few questions. When? And by how much? Of course, the Bank of England being the Bank of England, they didn't want to comment on that, but they did drop some interesting hints. They said, you know this chart, this one showing interest rate expectations in the coming months, the one that shows them coming down in a few months' time, getting down to 3% in a couple of years, that one looks kind of OK to us.
But there's another thing that might be cut too, taxes. The Chancellor says he'll slash them in next month's budget if he can.
It's difficult to know what the final numbers we're going to have at the budget are. It's still early days. It doesn't look like I'm going to have as much headroom as I had in the autumn statement to bring down taxes. But if I do bring them down, it will be in a responsible way.
But there's an issue here. The Governor says those tax cuts could affect the bank's ability to cut rates.
When fiscal policy is announced, we take it into account, as we have done this time, because we've taken the autumn measures into account this time.
You said with the autumn measures, you said actually they were kind of maybe less inflationary than they could have been, but still they were net inflationary. So these things matter, do they, when you're making your decision?
They enter into the whole assessment process.
Tax cuts versus rate cuts, the Treasury versus the bank. As the cost of living crisis cools, this election year is beginning to heat up. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Well, the interest rate decision and the economy is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnists and broadcasters Steve Richards and Carol Malone. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up. The Shadow Chancellor is making a big pitch to big business. But is she backing away from Labour's big £28 billion promise on net zero? She sits down with Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby. That's next. Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, if the polls are correct, it's going to be the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who is likely to be in charge of the Treasury for the longer term. And Labour's been carefully rebuilding relations with the world of business over the last year. And that culminated today with a business conference attended by big cheeses of the corporate world. Beth Rigby caught up with Rachel Reeves there, and she pressed her on one of her central economic policies.
Shadow Chancellor, first up, should we just get past the issues that's starting to cause you a real headache? Can you be straight with voters and tell them that you have decided not to pledge up to 28 billion a year, whether immediately or by the end of the next Parliament, into your green investment plan? You can't make that commitment anymore, can you?
Well, the Conservatives crashed the economy and sent mortgage rates and the cost of government borrowing soaring, and that does change what will be possible for an incoming Labour government. But there's going to be at least one more budget on March the 6th, possibly another one later in the year before we get those final numbers of what I hope an incoming Labour government, if we win the election, would inherit. And I've been really clear that all of our policies will be subject to the fiscal rules to get debt falling as a share of GDP.
OK, you said in June 2023 we will ramp up to 28 billion of investment by the end of the next Parliament. You obviously now cannot stand by that statement, can you?
Well, even since then, the costs of government borrowing, the cost of government debt have increased. And look, if there's one thing that I hope voters know about me is that I will never play fast and loose with the public finances, because when you do, you play fast and loose with family finances and you affect businesses as well. I will never do that. The fiscal rules will come first, and all of our policies will be subject to that iron discipline.
You've talked a lot to business about stability and certainty. You also have this policy currently as it stands to invest up to 28 billion by the end of the next Parliament. I understand that you want to wait for the next fiscal event or events, but it's pretty clear to me that up to 28 billion a year into green investment will not be Labour policy in its current form at the next general election. That's fair, isn't it? That's where you're at.
What people need to know is that the fiscal rules are the most important thing for me. I worked as an economist at the Bank of England before I became a politician. I know the importance of economic and fiscal stability, and that will always come first with me, and all of our policies will be subject to it, including investment in some really important things to help us grow our economy, like green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, floating offshore wind. We want to make those investments alongside business in the opportunities of the future, but everything has to be affordable.
But my question was, I'm not asking you to give me a figure. My question is, given what's happened to public finances, you're saying now that you are backing off from that commitment of up to 28 billion by the end of the next Parliament. That's pretty clear, isn't it?
What people can hear loud and clear is that all of our policies will be fully costed, fully funded and subject to the fiscal rules.
I think what people can hear is you're not answering the question.
Well, all of our policies have got to ensure that debt is falling as a share of GDP and that we're not borrowing for day-to-day spending. But there will be at least one more fiscal event, possibly two, before the next general election, and we need to know what that fiscal inheritance is going to be.
Torsten Bell, former Labour advisor, economic advisor now at the Resolution Foundation, told me the fiscal rules don't prevent borrowing, but the debt falling rule does mean that in the final year of the forecast you won't be able to borrow 28 billion or even 20 billion in the final year. So is that what's happening, that you'll still invest in it, but you acknowledge that you won't be able to hit that figure?
Well, what I absolutely acknowledge is the state of the public finances caused by the Tory damage to our economy is very different from when we first set out our ambitions, and the government have sent interest rates soaring because of their recklessness and irresponsibility with the economy, and that does affect what an incoming Labour government would do.
Will you give an update on this after the budget?
Well, of course we will update people on our thinking of this, but as I say,
after the budget.
Well, we will in our own time.
Because you're being smashed up about this.
Well, you know,
you are being smashed up by the Conservatives. They're undoing all your good work of rebuilding trust by hitting you around the head with this number you must wince at Prime Minister's questions.
We're at our business conference today, where there are 400 businesses here, another 200 joining us this evening. the people in the room today can see that the Labour Party has changed, that it is now only Labour that is a pro-business party in Britain today, and we're increasingly getting backing from business because they can see that our sums add up, and we've got policies and plans to grow our economy, whether that's reforming pensions, reforming planning, or ensuring that young people have got the skills they need to do the jobs of the future.
Rachel Reeves, will you invest as much as you can, or is the investment plan around green energy dead?
Well, I think there's huge opportunities to lower bills, to boost our energy and our economic security, and attract jobs to Britain in a very competitive global environment. It's why we've said that we would create a national wealth fund to invest alongside business in some of the opportunities for low carbon energy. And for every £1 that government puts in, we would expect to leverage in £3 of private sector investment. So I think these are exciting opportunities. Other countries are seizing them. I want Britain to as well, and we would work with business to do that.
The Conservatives keep saying time and again that the 28 billion figure means that you're going to end up taxing Britons more. It proves Labour cannot be trusted on the economy. It's a problem for you, isn't it?
Well, at the conference today, I've set out a cap on corporation tax, that it won't rise above the current level of 25%, and we would keep it under review to make sure that we are competitive internationally. Taxes under the Conservatives are now at a 70-year high, and under their plans are due to go up for each of the next 5 years. The Conservatives have become a high tax party because they've failed to grow the economy. Labour has a plan backed by business to grow our economy, and that's what will be needed to ensure that we can keep taxes low and have the money to invest in public services.
How much does it make you wince every time you hear these Tory attack lines on the 28 billion?
Well, look, I see Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday claiming that if you're coming off a fixed-rate mortgage deal, you'll be paying less, when the reality
you acknowledge
is
it's a problem for you. It's clouding the message. That's all we're talking about. When are you going to back down on this policy? It's all anyone talks about.
Well, you know, Beth, I go out campaigning week in, week out. I was in Peterborough last weekend, Leeds, out campaigning in my own constituency. It's not the main issue people are talking about. People are talking about what's happening to their mortgages, what's happening to their energy bills and the price of the weekly shop. And they want to know that Labour can be trusted with the public finances. And because of our fiscal rules, because of the fiscal lock and the additional powers for the Office for Budget Responsibility, it is clear now that it is Labour the party of economic and fiscal responsibility.
OK, I hope that in this interview you might be straight with me on this and just say, look, the funding commitment at that level is on the way out. Can you just make it clear that it's on the way out? I'm not asking you for an update on what the figure might be, but that you're going to have to row back from what you said in June 2023.
Well, all of our policies have to be subject to the very tough fiscal rules that I've set out. I think people can see that the economic environment, the fiscal environment has changed hugely, even just in the last few months, and we'll have to cut our cloth accordingly. But we'll set that out when we've got a clearer idea of the economic and fiscal inheritance that an outgoing Conservative government, if we have the opportunity to form the next government, will inherit.
So that was a yes?
Well, all of our policies, and I will just repeat it one more time, have to be subject to the fiscal rules, and the Green Prosperity Plan is no exception.
OK, Rachel Reeves, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rachel Reeves there, speaking to Beth Rippey, our political editor. Well, let's get the thoughts of Alicia and Phil, shall we? I mean, it's a dead policy, isn't it?
Well, the mistake was to get hung up on the number in the first place, and that's the mistake that the Labour Party made because they put the number out there. And inevitably, when you have a number like that, that becomes the focus of the policy. I mean, perfectly reasonable. The opposition would take a pot shot at it, and then journalists ask you about it. So the better position would have been to talk about the objective and the aspiration. You know, greening the economy is going to happen. The jobs that might come along with that, if it's done well, that's the sort of conversation the country has to have, and as a opposition you want to have. But instead, by leading with a number, you end up in a different conversation. So I think that's the error. It's not that the policy's a bad idea. And if you said these are our aspirations, and of course we'll do it consistent with the capacity of the country to afford it, that would be a perfectly reasonable answer.
I mean, I think even though there is, as Phil says, there's a consensus that, look, investing in green is a good thing for the economy, for jobs, for the environment. the Conservatives, I guess, have centred blood here slightly, haven't they?
So, yeah, I think what Labour are learning is that being activist and opposition doesn't do you well if you're trying to say that you should be governing. And look, the reality is they're proposing something that will push up taxes, push up inflation, and now they're being forced to actually answer on things they've said, whereas in the last few years they've got away with saying all sorts of outrageous things. Bankers' bonuses is another one that's come back to hit them only today. You know, stop being such an activist in opposition. You shouldn't be opposing things for opposing's sake. You should be being more honest with the public. So I think, you know, they're learning an important lesson. I imagine it's going to get a lot tougher for them as we head towards the election.
Well, I guess what they would say is, yeah, we promised 28 billion before Liz Truss crashed the economy.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a nonsense in terms of our recovery is still better than any other European country from COVID, despite what happened under Liz Truss, and you know I was no big fan of that.
No, that's fair.
But I mean, even but also let's look at Labour's record. You know, in Wales, they've got Labour shadow ministers going out saying, "Don't judge us on what's happened in Wales." Well, you're in charge in Wales, so how can we not? So I think they've got away with quite a lot because often the media don't want to talk about, let's look at Labour Wales compared to England, where outcomes are better for health, for education, for you name it, for poverty. It's all better in England than it is in Wales.
I want to talk a bit more broadly about Labour's decision to really try and be the economically credible party. They've obviously seen an opportunity here, right? And it just feels like a real journey, I guess, from Ed Miliband talking about the predators in the business world to now we have Rachel Reeves saying, yeah, she doesn't believe in caps and bankers' bonuses.
Yeah, I think it's a huge journey, and that's the shame of the 28 billion taking up all the attention, because actually it's a long way the Labour Party have come. I mean, yes, from Ed Miliband's speech, but also via Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. So the Labour Party engagement with business today, which has been very warm, it really is a signal that this is a Labour Party which is demonstrating it's different from its immediate past. And I absolutely believe Rachel Reeves when she says she's going to be fiscally conservative, at least at first. So I do think this is a big shift in the Labour Party, and I do think it's you have to do that, I think, as a Labour Party in order to win your credibility as a potential government. And I think they've been obviously helped by a Conservative Party which has been various forms of profligate stroke completely and utterly preposterous on the economy. And, of course, they've been helped by the shadow of Brexit. And so all of those things have changed the conditions in which the Labour Party can talk about business. And the reception they're getting from businesses is at the moment, there's an open door and it's a good conversation. And all of that is there's a lot to be proven still, of course, but all of that is a huge difference from where the Labour Party has been in recent past.
They're parking the tanks on your lawn?
Well, I think it's quite ironic, the phrase that they should be fiscally conservative. So they're essentially saying they have to be conservatives to be trusted on the economy. But secondly, I mean, Rachel Reeves was asked repeatedly, will you cut corporation tax? She refuses to answer the question. Her last manifesto, she stood that she was going to up it to 30%. So which is it? You're either someone that believes in upping it or you're not. They brought in this new plan where they're going to put 75 new regulations onto businesses. And when we look at people them being the party of business, 9 members of our cabinet started their own businesses. They know what it's like when you've got to keep the lights on, when you've got to keep people employed. In contrast, none of the shadow cabinet have run a business, but 10 of them have worked for the trade unions. So in terms of whose pocket they're going to be, whose interest they're in, it's going to be the trade unions. It's not business owners. They don't know what it is like to run a business. They don't know what it's like having to look at those ledgers and keep things in business.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Lots to discuss on Labour and the policy on that. Now, campaigners are concerned that laws designed to protect women from harassment outside abortion clinics will be watered down. Crossbench MPs have met the Home Secretary today to discuss the safe access zones. They say that draft guidance would allow protesters to approach women seeking treatment. Here's our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh.
OK, that's perfect. And you know why you're here today, don't you?
Yes.
Good.
Abortion is legal, and if you're seeking help inside a clinic, this is the conversation you'd expect to get.
Just make you sign some things, make sure this is definitely the right decision for you. Okay. Is that OK? Yes. Do you have any concerns about it?
But just outside, it's another story. MPs voted a year ago to create safety zones outside these clinics to stop anti-abortion protesters harassing women. But it's not fully in force yet.
Hey, sorry to bother. We're doing a story on the end of the public consultation on safety zones.
Women at this designated protest zone in Ealing insist they're there not to harass, but to help vulnerable women.
I'm sure you know exactly what brings us here. So so
Do you think that it's quite distressing for women who are going to have
not
who
at
are
all.
coming
we
here?
are just waving to them, saying hello, and can we offer you some help? Would you like a leaflet? That's all what we
But
say.
you are going up to them and offering
No, we cannot move from this
No, we stay
triangle.
on this
That's
spot.
our spot, so we cannot move from.
It's their spot because the council has enforced a protection order outside a clinic here. But now draft guidance just released by the Home Office allows for some exceptions to buffer zones, angering a coalition of MPs from both sides of the House who originally tabled the legislation.
What we've got out the other end, it's not what we voted for. There's that many exceptions. I think it says if they're praying, if they're informing. And the informing is often leaflets telling people they're going to hell with anatomically inaccurate diagrams of how big the baby is. So, you know, there's a huge mismatch, and it's come out 2 years later nearly.
Ellie was handed one of those leaflets while waiting for treatment.
After I sort of managed to process it all, I realised that I resented her for it. I think that actually made the sort of healing process, as it were, it made it harder. It wasn't something I sort of agreed to overnight. There was a lot of thought with me and my partner, and she undid all of that quite quickly.
The government says they are considering all responses to a public consultation before final guidance is published.
If it stays in its current form, what's in the consultation, do you think that is the Home Office trying to thwart the will of Parliament?
Let's have a proper conversation before we start making accusations.
MPs who met the Home Secretary today say they're now hopeful those loopholes in the guidance will be closed. The aim by the spring. Serena Barker-Singh, Sky News.
Some breaking news to bring you now. It's on the Bristol murders. The major crime investigation team has now charged 2 teenage boys with the murders of Mason Rist and Max Dixon. The boys, one aged 15 and the other aged 16, remain in police custody. They'll appear at Bristol Youth Court, which is sitting as Bristol Magistrates Court tomorrow. That's Friday, the 2nd of January. So Mason, 15, and Max, 16, were attacked by a group of people in the Knoll West area of Bristol on Saturday. Police officers and members of the public, they went to their aid, but sadly, they both died of their injuries in hospital. The charges were authorised by the Crown Prosecution Service following a review of the evidence that was collated by the investigation team. In addition to the murder charges, detectives have also charged 2 men with 2 counts each of assisting an offender. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Well, it's an election year, so MPs worried about their seats might be brushing up their CVs. And here on the Politics Hub, we're keen to lend a hand with the help of artificial intelligence. More next.
There's been a survey done on our favourite cities outside of Europe, called City Breaks Anonymous, generally with short-haul travel. These are much longer destinations, and Australia has totally cleared the board and has won with several cities coming top.
Three, in fact.
Top 3, yes.
Yeah,
Sydney, Perth
and Melbourne.
And Melbourne, yeah. I think it's quite interesting that the whole survey, what's always really interesting with these things is the story behind it. And, you know, I think it says a lot about perhaps the people who were surveyed that Australia's come out top. You know, I mean, that's a long way to go for a city break. And actually, the US hasn't done quite so well, which is perhaps unfair, but perhaps reflective of one of the criteria, which is value. And of course...
Expensive to go to the US.
It's very expensive. It's actually no less expensive to go to Australia now as well. But I think the perception of if you are going to go to Australia, you've saved for it, it's perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime, twice-in-a-lifetime trip. Whereas the US, much more accessible, lots more people go there. And if you've been recently, you will have had a big shock at how far your money no longer goes.
Another one on the list, Kyoto. Have you been to Kyoto?
No.
Have you been to Kyoto?
I have been to Kyoto.
What did you think?
I thought it was absolutely incredible. I mean, it's just such a different culture, a different world. There's so many beautiful buildings, absolutely extraordinary. Golden Temple there. It's one of the most incredible gardens. And the food, of course, is just absolutely...
I think it's, it's definitely a very well-preserved part of Japan, really. If we're talking about value, though,
Yes.
we like to look beyond those first cities, beyond the capital cities, to more affordable alternatives. And actually, Kyoto is very definitely recommended. But if you wanted something that's very buzzy at the moment, you could look at Seoul, for example.
Seoul?
Yeah. Back to the US, you talked about Chicago. I mean, how about Philadelphia? It's just always really worth looking beyond the obvious for those value equations, because if what you want is a city experience, I mean, obviously it's not going to work if you've got something very specific on your wish list that you want to tick off. But if you just want to go, you have great food, experience a city in that country, look at those second cities.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, if you've been watching Sky News today, you might have seen a report from our technology correspondent, Arti Nashiapan, about how an increasing number of companies are using artificial intelligence to help recruit staff and filter down job applications, sometimes unfairly. Well, politics is a pretty ruthless business, and we do have an election coming up, so we wondered if AI might be able to give some pointers to the Prime Minister. We asked ChatGPT to act as a careers advisor, and then, based upon what it knew about his experience and interests, to suggest some other careers he might try. Here's a summary of what it came up with.
As Rishi Sunak, you already have a prominent career in politics and finance. If you're considering a change, perhaps exploring international relations or economic consulting could align with your skills and experience.
Pretty good, I reckon.
I think the economic consulting bit is probably more accurate.
Yeah, you'd go for that then. Yeah, not bad.
I think you should try politics for a change.
Very good. Well, we did think we would see what advice it might give to our panel. Obviously not you'd ever,
Not that we need new jobs.
Here's some for Alicia.
Given your background as Alicia Kearns, a Member of Parliament with expertise in defence and security, you may want to consider roles in international relations, defence consultancy or diplomatic service. Additionally, leadership positions in organisations focused on security policy could be a natural fit.
I think that's pretty good.
I mean, it's pretty accurate.
Pretty accurate, right?
Yeah, although I did love the fact that it clearly doesn't know that you can't go back into diplomatic service, really, if you've been political.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're no longer neutral. So AI needs a little bit of a tweak.
Yeah.
Not bad. Not too bad.
Not too bad.
Here's some for Phil. Let's have a listen.
It's not very creative, though.
Phil Collins, as a journalist, you might explore in-depth feature writing, investigative journalism, or even editorial roles. Specialising in a particular field of interest or covering unique stories could enhance your profile and impact in the media industry.
It feels like it's a bit of a burn, almost. Like, you could actually try doing some journalism, maybe,
Exactly.
Phil.
You could be on the Politics Hub one day.
You never know, if you play cards right.
Yeah. I do think it'd be a bit more creative, given how much there is out there about people. But has it not done you, Sophie?
Well,
right, let's get on. Let's hold on to your boots.
Only fair.
Let's
only
go.
fair. I'm very happy here, obviously, on the Politics Hub. But let's have a listen to my own potential career prospects.
As Sophy Ridge, a successful broadcast journalist, you might consider advancing in political journalism, hosting your own show, or exploring opportunities in investigative reporting to further leverage your skills and experience in the field.
There you go.
Why haven't you thought of having your own show, Sophie?
I think that's a really good idea.
God,
very good.
If
I think
only
it's a great
someone in
idea.
Sky was smart enough to think of that.
Then I could come on it.
I could come on it. I
With
think
your
it could be a lot more
diplomatic
creative.
and
I think this AI needs a serious kind of jack of more electricity.
I mean,
and energy.
if you paid money for that, for a careers advisor, you'd be like, come on, guys, I need a few more ideas, I think. But, there we go. It is interesting, isn't it, AI, though? You were sort of saying how you feel that it could be something that could be explored and used quite well.
Absolutely. So other diplomatic services around the world, I'm always looking to see where we can learn from others, are using AI either to assess how effective a diplomatic response has been, so how has it been received in 100 plus other countries, or they're using it to work out whether they've got internal bias as to how they appoint certain ambassadors to certain jobs. So I think, there's great things. And when I'm sat there sometimes struggling to think of a word or how to start something, I type it into my AI on my phone and it just gives you some extra ideas. It's like having an additional thing to bounce off.
Could write a column for you.
Yes.
Just run it through AI.
I think it can do the research for you for a column. I'm not sure it can write the column. I mean, obviously, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think at the moment it's too general, as you saw from the accounts of our CVs. So where it's trying to compress an enormous amount of information quickly, obviously it's brilliant to that at the moment. Who knows where it will go?
Who knows? Great to have you both on the show today. Very varied programme. That is it from us tonight. I will see you... I won't see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Neil Patterson. And I'm going to see you on Monday at 7 p.m. Always good to have you guys with us. I'll see you on Monday.